study group. Perfect. Hello. Hey, Daddy. Hello. Hi, y'all. Hey, y'all. All right. So, for those of you tuning in, hey, sweetheart, I am Divine Aurora. Hey, sweetheart, I'm actually going to Hawaii later this year. So I actually have a trip planned on September with my family. So I'm going to be visiting Hawaii. So I'm like super excited about that. I just planned that yesterday. So that'll be cool. That'll be fun. So for those of you tuning in, this is our study group hour, or study group time. So what we do is we read material, books, and then we discuss the material. And then we also discuss spiritual questions. If you're tuning in for a personal reading or to ask me a personal question, sorry guys, that was the last hour. So you'll have to come back on Friday. So yeah, sorry guys, sorry Donnie Marie, that was last hour. So this is our study group time. So we're only discussing the material in the book, no exceptions. All right, so what I do is I basically read passages, and then I stop, I comment on different parts of it, etc. If you guys would like to ask questions pertaining to the material or spiritually minded questions, that I will accept. And I don't read them right away. I actually go through the material. I give my own lecture on things or my own speech, and then I come back and I'll look at some of y'all's questions to see what y'all are asking about the material or just about the stuff as well. And then I will answer a few of them before I get off today. So, all right, guys. So I'm going to get started here. So we are on a conversation. We're on A Course in Miracles, and this is the complete and annotated edition. We are on chapter. Let's see, where are we at? I want to see if where I have there we go, my bookmark, because I'm like, I need my bookmark. Oh, I have two bookmarks. That's probably why last time I got confused with where I was at. Okay, so here we go. Make sure that I'm not more ahead than I thought I was. Okay, cool. All right, so we are on page 96. We're on page 96. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and then we'll come back and talk about some stuff. The last time we were talking, okay, yeah, here we'll start at number 5 because that's a good starting point. All psychoanalysts made one common error in that they attempted to uncover unconscious content. You cannot understand unconscious activity in these terms because content is applicable only to the more superficial unconscious levels to which the individual himself contributes. This is the level at which he can readily introduce fear, and usually does. Freud was right in calling this level preconscious and emphasizing that there is a fairly easy interchange between preconscious and conscious material. He was also right in regarding the censor as an agent for the protection of consciousness from fear. His major error lay in his insistence that the preconscious is necessary at all in the psychic structure. If the psyche contains fearful levels from which it cannot escape without splitting, its integration is permanently threatened. It is essential not to control the fearful, but to eliminate it. Here ranks concept of will. And by the way, some of these things may sound a little bit like, because this is a conversation between Helen Schumann and Jesus, or what she says is Jesus. And so she is a psychotherapist. So some of the conversation is going to be very psychoanalytical, but I will come back and break some of this down so that way we can grasp it. Here, Ranke's concept of the will was particularly good, except that he preferred to ally it only with humanity's own truly creative ability, but did not extend it to its proper union with God's. His birth trauma, another valid idea, was also too limited in that it did not refer to the separation, which was really a false idea of birth. Physical birth is not a trauma in itself. It can, however, remind the individual of the separation, which was a very real cause of fear. So I'll stop there for a second because this is a really good, interesting idea. And I've said this before, that what we experience in the physical world is very much it mimics the energetic state. It mimics our existence as spiritual or as energetic beings. In other words, when we started off as God, we splintered off and became individuations of source, we actually didn't split off. We just gave ourselves the illusion of separation so that we could retain a singular mindset or singular perspective. And so the same thing happens with a woman when she's giving birth. The child is a part of her, and it is just it becomes a part of her body. And then as the child is going to be born into this world, into this physical incarnation, it has to go through this process of separation. And the process of separation can be very, very, very frightening and traumatic for the child, because it is essentially going through a very very obvious form of separation. So not only are we, separating ourselves or giving ourselves the illusion of separation because we are a singular form from source, but we're also giving ourselves a very physical one as well, which can be very traumatic and frightening. This is why many times you'll find people who, since the separation, they can't handle it, or they can't cope as well, because they don't feel the connection to source. They don't understand how to have the connection to source. They only understand how to feel whatever is available to them. And so you'll find people who become very consumed by any pleasures that distract them from the state of being human, or the state of suffering, because to be human is to suffer. That's the part of the state. It's part of the process. So that's just why you have people who become addicts. They become addicted to things that help them to feel some sense of pleasure or some sense of fulfillment. And that seems to be a common trend with a lot of people who don't form or don't produce healthy ways of coping with this reality. And this reality is not easy. I mean, we wake up every morning. If you're young, your body is probably working in your favor. If you're older, you start to realize this is not going to be fun as I get older. And so you get more achy, and you have more this or you have more that going on. And it's a process. I think, Sylvia Brown, I think, says it best. Is like the reason why we age is because it prepares us. The process of aging prepares us to let go of this reality. It prepares us to want to leave this reality so that we can go ahead and disconnect at some point down the line. And I agree with that, because I'm like, yeah, like as you get older, as you see more, as you know more, if you can handle it, then you'll stay with an integrity. But if you can't handle it, or if it's really hard, then you start to struggle with all of these symptoms of being overwhelmed. This is the reason why we sleep every night, or most people sleep, because we all need breaks. We all need breaks from this reality. And the closest thing to a break from this reality next to death is the mental separation of this reality, which is the dream state. And in the dream state, we at least get to experience some things that are a little bit different than what this physical world produces for us. So it's a way to have a bit of a break, if you will. 9. No one as yet has fully recognized either the therapeutic value of fear or the only way in which it can truly be ended. When you miscreate, you are in pain. In other words, miscreating means producing in this world or manifesting out of fear. If you produce or manifest out of love, then it is in alignment with the trend or with the flow of what was intended to begin with from creation. All creation is a labor of love. That's what creation is, a labor of love of source. So when we miscreate, then we're still creating, but we're not creating in the flow of love. We're miscreating in a state of fear, from a state of fear. When we miscreate, we actually produce more fear. We produce more suffering, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. So we're essentially amplifying and magnifying the presence of fear and the presence of the disconnect of the separation and the suffering that we endure as human beings. We amplify all that when we miscreate. When we're consciously creating, we can be a lot more selective with what we're going to throw our energy into or pour our energy and ourselves into. And if we create from a place of love, then we will actually produce more love in this world. We will remind others of our connection to source. We will act as a bridge for them between source and themselves, because sometimes people don't consider themselves worthy, and that's a product of either conditioning because of religion and belief system, or that's a product of conditioning from the human experience. If you've had to go through a really traumatic experience with people who treated you like dirt and made you feel like you weren't good enough, then you are definitely going to amplify the presence of the separation from us and God or source. And so we people who can work from a state of love, we can amplify that connection for them, or we can remind people of who they are and what they're really here for, or at least remind them of their never-ending disconnect from God. They're not disconnected. They're just pretending to have the experience of being human. Let's going back to this. Yeah. So no one as yet has fully recognized either the therapeutic value of fear or the only way in which it can truly be ended. When you miscreate, you are in pain. The cause and effect principle here is temporarily a real expediter. Actually, cause is a term properly belonging to God, and effect, which should also be capitalized, is his sonship. This entails a set of, go to the next page. This entails a cause and effect relationship which are totally different from those which humanity introduced into the miscreation. The fundamental opponents in the real basic conflict are creation and miscreation. All fear is implicit in the second, just as all love is inherent in the first. Because of this difference, the basic conflict is one between love and fear, which is, again, another representation of like our good nature and our bad nature, our goodness and our love and joy and goodness and our evilness. So the little angel on our shoulders, that's just a representation of that. And there's this constant battle that's happening within us, because being in this form is not an easy process. It takes practice, and it's a balancing act. And that's just from the physical body, where we really are dealing more with the emotional, mental state as well. There's a reason why when we go through the process of being born into small bodies and having to learn to use them, there's a reason why that's set up that way, because being in these physical bodies is not natural for us. It is unnatural for us to be confined to a form, because we are source. We are unlimited beings, but we force ourselves into shoes that don't fit very well, because it helps us to get done what we need to get done. No guy wants to wear a cup. They're uncomfortable, right? I've never worn a cup, so I couldn't tell you what that feels like. But, that same thing, no woman really cares to wear a bra. They're uncomfortable from what I hear, unless you buy the really good ones, right? So it's the same thing. So when we're in this form, that's what it feels like. And we don't really want to stay in this form, but we have to for the lessons that we are here to gain. And what they're talking about here is this battle between, the two parts of ourselves. So once we're in this physical form and we're occupying this body, once we go through the growing up process, which, we're children growing into adults, we're learning how to use our bodies. We're learning how to use our brains and our minds. We're learning how to experience as a human being, but it requires that much practice for us to get used to it. It's not an easy thing to just, okay, let me just throw a soul in a completely fully formed body and they're going to know how to use it. No. Like if any of you have ever woken up, which I mean, most of us probably have, woken up from a dream or woken up from sleep and you're half awake and half asleep and you're not all there yet. But when you wake up really quickly, it's really hard to kind of balance yourself and get a handle of what's going on. And even then, like if anyone has ever had alcohol and you're like right at that state where you're buzzing but you're not drunk, or if you're vaping or you're taking an edible and you're not high but you're definitely in that state of like very relaxation, you don't really feel as much of a connection to your physical body. You don't feel as much of a connection to this physical world. Some things just don't matter to you, and so that's great. But if we're going to be fully human and having that full human experience and gaining the most from this experience, we really do have to be in the body. We really have to be in our state of mind that is conducive to giving ourselves the experiences necessary. So we have to experience things very, very, and sometimes intensely. It's intentional because that's where the experience comes from. That's where the memories, where the information, where the value is, when you have those experiences. The fundamental opponents in the real basic conflict are, and I was just talking about this, for energy can, in this respect, Freud was more accurate than his followers, who were essentially more wishful. Energy can emanate from both creation and miscreation, and the particular ratio between them which prevails at a given point in time does determine the behavior at that time. If miscreation did not engender energy in its own right, it would be unable to produce destructive behavior, which it very patently does. Let me read that again because I want to break that down. If miscreation did not engender energy in its own right, it would be unable to produce destructive behavior, which it very patently does. In other words, if you miscreate, and whenever we miscreate, it's out of fear, and usually it's a destructive energy, or just a destructive experience or manifestation. If it is unable to create anything on its own, then there's nothing that will really come from it. There has to be like a balancing act. So there's almost like a balancing act. It's almost like a scale. If there isn't anything there that can be created from it, and it's just a miscreation, it's a destructive energy, and there isn't anything that's kind of tied to that can help to create something, then nothing will occur. It will just destroy, and then that's the end of it. So there has to be kind of something tied to that. But usually there are creations from miscreations as well, because this is what I said, is that energy is never wasted. Nothing is ever wasted. An experience is never wasted. Even if you have a horrible experience or a tragic experience or trauma experience, etc., you can still create or produce something from that if you do not further engage in the energy of fear or in the energy of more miscreation, because miscreation is just only going to continue to miscreate. It can't create anything unless it's tied to something that you can turn it around or engage that energy and shift it. And not a lot of people are able to do that. That's not something that is an easy process to do, to take something that's destroyed or destructive, or to take something that is a miscreation and shift it into a creation. That's not really something that's easy to do for most people. Usually people have to go through a process of realigning themselves with creation, with a conscious creation to create something going forward. So to take something dark and turn it into light, that is a skill. And there are people who have those skills, but it's not an easy skill to maintain or to sustain. That's usually reserved for masterships or for masters, because they understand the dynamics. They understand that nothing is wasted. Everything that you make has energy, because like the creations of God, it comes from energy and is endowed by its maker with the power to make. Miscreation is still a genuine creative act in terms of the underlying impulse, but not in terms of the content of what is made. This does not deprive what is made of its own creative power. It does, however, guarantee that the power will be misused or used fearfully. That's what I was talking about. To deny this is merely the previously mentioned fallacy of depreciation. Although Freud made a number of fallacies of his own, he did avoid this one in connection with psychic energy. The later theorists denied the split energy concept, not by attempting to heal it, but by interpreting it instead of redistributing it. This placed them in an illogical position of assuming that the split which their therapies were intended to heal had not occurred. Research of this approach is essentially a form of hypnosis. This is quite different from Freud's approach, which merely ended in a deadlock. A similar deadlock occurs when both the power of creation and of miscreation coexist. This is experienced as conflict only because the individual feels as if both were occurring at the same time. He believes in what he has miscreated in his own unconsciousness, and he naturally believes it is real because he has made it. He thus places himself in a position where the fearful becomes real. Nothing but level confusion can result as long as this belief is held in any form. Part of this, I think, also includes like the idea of an atomic bomb or an atomic reaction. When you think of an atomic reaction, it's the way that there's the way that the reaction occurs, it's almost like opposites, and so, or I mean, it's like splitting the atom. But the atom itself is a marker of energy. It's a marker of creation. It essentially represents like a cell of God, of Source. And so when you split that cell, or when you split that energy, when you engage with that, you unleash a power of either destruction or a power of creation, because we all sustain and support the power of Source within us. We are all manifestors. And so usually we do it in much more subtle ways, like using our state of being, our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, our words. That's a subtle, more subtle, more docile form of creation or manifesting in this reality, but something like dealing with like a splitting of the atom, that's engaging in energy. It's engaging a cell of God, a cell of Source, which unleashes a power that all of creation is made with. And some people can use an atomic reaction to destroy, which we have done, and some people can use an atomic reaction to produce and create, which we have done as well, because we understand that we can do both with it. And the same thing with all of the universe, with all of our abilities. A similar deadlock occurs when both the power of creation and of miscreation coexist. This is experienced in conflict. Okay, I already said that. Inappropriate denial and equally inappropriate identification of the real factors in the basic conflict will not solve the problem itself. The conflict cannot disappear until it is fully recognized that miscreation is not real, and therefore there is no conflict. This entails a full realization of the basic fact that, although you have miscreated in a very genuine sense, you need neither continue to do so nor to suffer from your past errors in this respect. A redistribution of psychic energy, then, is not the solution, but the idea that both kinds must exist and the belief that one can is amenable for use or misuse are real distortions. One way out is to stop miscreating now. Miscreating now and accept the atonement for miscreation of the past. Only this can reestablish true single-mindedness. So let me come back to this for a second, because this includes the idea of karma. And so let's think about the idea of karma, okay? There's source energy, and then the source energy kind of splits itself into micro sources, which is the soul, which is simply a baby soul, a baby God, a baby source, but it's still Source, but it's a smaller version or a intentionally limited perspective or version of Source. And so that baby soul, that baby God, or that soul, lost my train of thought, trying to remember what I was about to say about, karma, yes. So the idea is that when that soul immediately begins to manifest or to express itself in form, which we are all expressions of souls. I am a physical Ferny. I'm a physical manifestation of my soul, which I named Aja, or the name is Aja. So I'm a physical manifestation. All of my lifetimes are physical manifestations of that soul. And each one of us, myself, all of my other incarnations that I've had, we are interacting and engaging with creation. We're engaging with this reality. And we either miscreate or we create. We either miscreate out of fear or we create out of love. And the process is to throw yourself into the darkness, remember that you're light, and ascend back to the state of self-awareness as Source. That is the cycle of the soul. So it basically starts off as Source, it cycles away into darkness, and then it re-emerges into light once it realizes its true being. when it starts to cycle back, because once it cycles away, it's almost like when you think of like an asteroid. When an asteroid leaves the sun and solar system, goes all the way out and then comes back in. And so when a soul soul is cycling away from source, it experiences and expresses more out of fear than out of love, because it is having to grapple with the effect of separation, the illusion of separation. So it is descending into darkness. This is what people call the fallen angel story, etc. We are all angels that have fallen intentionally so that we can remember that we're light. Because in order to experience ourselves and know ourselves, we have to know ourselves in various spectrums and in various ways and forms. So we cycle away, we descend into darkness, and then once we hit the peak darkness experience, then we begin to ascend back into light again. It's like a cyclical pattern. When we are cycling down into darkness, we miscreate a lot, because we're stumbling through trying to figure out who we are, what we are. We're trying to understand ourselves in our limited form, because we are having trouble grasping the fact that we are no longer source and we're this limited thing. Not only that, but we're not used to knowing ourselves as limited. We're used to knowing ourselves as infinite. So we miscreate a lot. And you can call these people or these beings who are in that process, you can call them young souls or baby souls, you can call them whatever you want, but we make a lot of mistakes. We miscreate a lot. And every miscreation also has a chain reaction, in that there will be souls that react in response to that and produce more light because of it. And then there will also be other souls that align with the miscreation and further miscreate, trying to understand themselves. Because you can't know yourself until you know what you're not. And so what we're doing is knowing what we are not, so that we can know who we are and cycle back around. So we miscreate a lot. This is where we start to create karma for ourselves. We create a lot of, you can call it negative karma, but this is just, you can call it whatever you want, but I'll call it negative karma because it's an easy term. Negative karma. We produce a lot of negative karma when we're cycling away. And all of those miscreations ripple out into the universe. And so as we begin to cycle back, in order for us to cycle back into light, we have to assume the entirety of who we are, not only from the perspective of light, but also from the perspective of darkness, what we have been. We have to embrace that. We have to own it. So as a soul, we have to own ourselves and all that we've produced in miscreating, all that we produced out of fear. We have to own that. And so as we cycle back, we have to essentially ascend, and we have to alleviate the suffering we created. We have to alleviate the miscreations in how it's affected others. We have to do a lot of damage control is what we're doing. But in the process of doing damage control, we're actually recreating or creating anew out of love and out of light. And so that is the ascension process going in reverse. People who are in that route and headed in that direction, reascending to source, they go through a lot of very unique experiences that are only applicable to those souls. And there are always souls cycling away. There's always souls cycling towards. It's just an ongoing process, because that is how source is all things, is by expressing and experiencing all things, cycling and cycling and cycling. And you can consider part of this breathing out and coming in, breathing out and coming in. You can call that a big bang. You can call that God's breath. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But it's this whole cyclical process that we make as souls. So that's how that works. And so sometimes karma, people don't understand the idea of karma. You know, if I in one lifetime produced suffering and pain for people, then at some point when I am fully aware of what I've done, I will have to own that, and then I will have to use that and create something out of love to offset that. And that's kind of rectifying the karma, if you will. So we have to do a lot of damage control, which you can call it karma damage control, because that's what we do when we start to reascend. So I'm gonna stop there because that's a good amount of stuff to go through. So let me go through some of your questions about the material here. Let's see. Hey, Cassidy. Let's see. All right. Yeah, alcoholism, addiction is a very difficult thing. People, we get so fixated on the addiction. The addiction is a symptom of a problem. The addiction is a symptom of how someone is trying to cope with trauma. So the addiction isn't the issue, the trauma is the issue. And when you start to help someone release the trauma, when you help them release the trauma or to come to terms with the trauma and re-empower themselves, take their power back, the need for any kind of stimuli to help them feel good or better isn't going to be as intense, and they will be better able to balance themselves in this reality. So there's less of a need for substances or for uses of substances. Yeah, sleep. I love sleep. Let's see. Yeah, absolutely. So it's jumped in and say, okay, going back over here. All these trolls in the chat asking people to message them for readings because they will take your money, y'all. So just so y'all know. Yanga's like, I thought I'd miss you when you come back because South Africa times are different than you. Yeah, I know the timing, it can be a bit intense, but I'm later in the day, right? So I think you guys are late. You should. I think you're later, right? I think you're later in the evening now. That Pauline Hurdy is insane, girl. Doesn't she know that this is study group, not personal reading time? Oh my god, like people are just like trying to come for me. Jin Mei. Yeah, deep miscreation and creation and the cycling into darkness to light. Is this good versus evil? So, miscreation and creation and the cycling into darkness to light. Is this good versus evil? The thing about it is, it's not so much to do with good versus evil, because it's just more about knowing yourself as source and then knowing yourself as the lack of awareness as source. And so when we are source, we start off in the fullness of that understanding. And then as we start to cycle out of that being our full, whatever we are as source, because that's a whole lot. I mean, I don't think any of us in human form can really truly comprehend. This is why they say people, we don't truly comprehend what it's like to be source, because we're not designed in this body. We're not designed to be source in this body fully. We're not designed to understand and comprehend the enormity of that. It's huge. It's a huge thing. And so when we cycle away from source, we have to condense ourselves. We have to reduce ourselves in form and in perspective and in mind. In order for us to have the experience of flying in the air, we would have to turn ourselves into birds. But birds have very limited capacity based on what their structure is. Same thing with human beings. Human beings, God is not a human being. And people like to think of God as like a human being. God is not a human being. God is beyond the comprehending mind that we possess right now. We can grasp a little bit of it, but it's a whole lot more than what we can understand and comprehend in this form, because we're just not designed to handle that kind of information. This is why, like, whenever I do readings for people, people always have this assumption and this idea that psychics and mediums know everything and see everything. That's never been true for any psychic out there. You'll never find a psychic that knows every single thing about every single person. You may know some really good psychics that can definitely clue in and tell you some details, but you're not going to meet any psychics out there that will be able to tell you every single thing, period, because it is impossible. Because in order to be able to tell you every single thing, your brain would have to be able to comprehend and grasp and take in every single thing, and it's just not designed to do so. It's very limited. It's almost like trying to throw a gallon of water into a glass. It's just not going to happen, and at some point you actually start to encounter a lot of confusion if you try to even do that. So you have to be very aware of how you're engaging with the higher realms or with these expanded forms of consciousness and awareness, just because it's just not possible for us to do it in this physical form. Let's see. Mm-hmm. That's okay, Robin. Don't worry about it. Thoughts on the Mandela effect. Off topic, I know. The Mandela effect it's this idea, from what I've understood it, which I get. Like, think of it this way. You ever hear a song where you remembered it and you could sing that song like every single time the same way, but then like down the road you hear it again and it's very different and you're like, where's the song that I heard? It's a very different song, or it ends very differently. And it's like, how did that change? And then you ask people and they don't remember the other song, or they don't remember what you're talking about, or you look around and there was never a song that had, and that's an example of it. And part of it is because it's this idea, and the idea is that we exist in simultaneous realities, or in realities that are kind of carbon copies of each other, but they're not exactly the same. They're all slightly different. This is part of infinity, because the idea of infinity is that everything is infinite. It exists in every shape and form, and within every type of there's infinite options. It's almost like when you look at a mirror and you look at it and there's like all these like reflections and you can see yourself into infinity. It's the same thing with a parallel universe. Every single parallel universe is basically butted up against each other, and they're kind of all tightly engaging with each other. And so sometimes what we're experiencing in this physical reality may actually not be technically part of this reality. It might be part of a parallel universe that is kind of butted up right next to ours. But if we shift our energetic state, or if we shift our awareness and consciousness, we become aware of some of those experiences, where we become aware of some of those scenarios and energies. So that's the idea of a parallel universe. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I'm trying to simplify it. And so the idea of a Mandela effect is, if I was, I'm creating my reality, because we all create our reality. As I create my reality, and as we're moving forward on this reality, if I have a sudden shift in my perspective or in my state of being, it's possible that you can do a jump, which means you're jumping from one universe to another one. So you're sliding into a side universe or into another universe. And so when you slide over, or you pop into an alternate universe, you're not going to know much of a difference, because it's still like a carbon copy of your own, except there's slight differences in it. And so that's when you'll notice that, okay, some things are different than the way I remember them, or some things are slightly off than what they were when I remember. And so you'll notice some of those things. And everybody, we're always like, it's not like we're anchored into our reality. Our reality is just it's like a section of water in the ocean. If you swim in a specific spot, then you're occupying that. But if you decide to swim a little bit further out, then you can swim into a different section of water. It's still in the ocean. It's infinite. And so it's the same kind of idea. So you won't even realize that you're in one section versus another, because they look almost identical to you. You would have to make a lot of major jumps before you are drastically in a completely different type of parallel universe than where you started off at. But usually we stay pretty consistent, because it's all designed for us to flow back and forth within different universes. So we're designed to kind of do that. Let's see. So that's it for the questions on this side. Walk-ins. Oh, that's a good question. I don't buy into the idea of walk-ins. I'm going to tell you why. Because there's a reason why we start off as children, like I mentioned. There's a reason why we start off as infants, and we have to learn how to use these bodies, these physical forms, in this state, in this reality. There's a reason why that's set up that way. So the idea of a soul suddenly dropping out and another one dropping into a body, or a spirit dropping out and then another one dropping into the body, to me does not make any sense whatsoever, because that immediately negates the entire process of going through learning how to use the physical body in the physical form. So that doesn't really fit. What I believe, and what I've asked Aja, because I've actually asked Aja this question, and what I've gotten back from Aja is that a walk-in is not actually a different soul. A walk-in is simply a different personality consciousness from another incarnation. So, for example, I've mentioned this before. People think that in those past lives, and that's like everything has to be lined up in like a row as like start to finish, but we're actually simultaneous lifetimes all at the same time, meaning that I exist as Ferny. I also exist in different forms in this reality, also in the past and also in the future. I'm just consciously engaged and aware of this moment right now, but I'm engaged in many different incarnations, both past and future and present. So, for example, two examples that I'll give you of this is because this came up for me because there's a gentleman who he was known as a benevolent dictator, and I was made aware that this was one of my incarnations, but he existed in like the late 1800s, and he died I think a year or two before I was born, because we share the same, my birthday is his death date, or his birthday is my birthday, something like that. Anyways, he was known as a benevolent dictator, and he was basically like a dictator, but he was very much the opposite of what a traditional dictator would do, which means he didn't go in to the society or the country, take it over, and then like take advantage of everybody and only got his own. He actually made sure that his people were taken care of, but if you got in his way, he was going to like take you out. So that was the way he operated, but he was known as the benevolent dictator. And so that lifetime ended, I think, in like the early 80s, if I remember correctly, reading what I read it. But I also have a very specific lifetime that I remember from memory through some of my dreams of having died on the Titanic as one of the stewardesses in the second class. So that I very clearly remember, because I have only remembered that since I was a kid, and that's something that I've not been able to like let go of. It's been very consistent for me. So the thing about it is, for me, it made no sense, because I remember that lifetime, but I also, if I was this gentleman as well, they overlap each other, meaning that the lifetimes are happening at the same time. She was in the early 1900s. He existed in the late 1800s, and then he died in like the 80s or whatnot. So to me, I was like, well, how is that possible? Because they were living at some point at the same time. How can I have been both lifetimes? And what Aja said is that you don't have to. You don't exist sequentially. I mean, you're not going from one lifetime to the next in perfect sequence. You exist as multiple lifetimes in multiple dimensions. There aren't new souls being created. There's only new forms of consciousness and new forms of being. So the souls that exist are the souls that exist. But those souls fragment themselves into these consciousness, and those consciousnesses are what we know as like spiritual personalities. Myself being Ferny, this benevolent dictator Tito, and then this other woman who passed, who I think her name was Catherine, actually, or Kathleen, and on the Titanic. So all of these are part of the same soul, but when a soul has experiences, it breaks itself apart, trying to grasp and understand itself, and it produces more and more and more personalities. And so this is why there are several personalities that can exist simultaneously that belong to the same soul. This is also the same reason why it is very rare for people to encounter a soulmate, because people are very obsessed with the idea of soulmates. And what I've said repeatedly is most people who end up in relationships that are long-term or that they consider to be their soulmate, it's usually not a soulmate. Soulmates are very rare situations. And what makes a soulmate is I have a soul that produces a personality, but it also produces another personality in the same lifetime. Those two individuals are part of the same soul. You sometimes encounter this with identical twins. You sometimes encounter this with people who do have those kinds of connections where they are that they're all involved with each other. So, but it's not a common thing. Most people, when you encounter a soul, you basically are attached to that person for the rest of your life. You never really want to leave that person. So it's hard for people to experience a full human life if they're attached at the hip with their soulmate, which is why we don't often experience soulmate connections in a lifetime. It does happen, but it's rare. It's not a common thing. What most people experience as a soulmate is a kindred spirit or a kindred soul, which is, it's not your identical soul, it's another soul, but there's a lot of exchange and engagement with that other being, and you both give each other a lot of lessons and so forth. So there's a lot of that's a part of the process. But this is what Aja told me, was that this is why this is actually the structure of God or source, but in like larger format. And then if you reduce it, it's the same structure. And then if you reduce it again, it's the same structure. So think of it this way. It's almost like, how can you have more than one child at the same time? You can have more than one child at the same time, and every child has a different or unique personality, but they all came from you. And so they exist simultaneously. Now, for us, it's the same thing. Our soul produces different personalities, spirit personalities, which inhabit a body. So when going back to walk-ins, because I know I totally got away from that topic, the idea of a walk-in is that, at some point a soul is like, okay, I'm done with this body in this lifetime. I'm going to go ahead and walk out. And then another spirit personality is going to walk in. I believe that what's walking in is not actually a completely separate soul. I think it's just a different spirit consciousness, but it's the same soul. So it's the same. If that person, both of those personalities belong to the same soul, you could consider it to be a soul mate, but if they're not mates because they're not there at the same time. But it's one soul uses that life experience, uses that opportunity, and then has that spirit personality engaging with it. And then at some point that spirit personality is pulled back, and a new one steps in, still belonging to the same soul. So it still has all of that information and knowledge, but it's assuming it in a different way because it's an opportunity for it to do something different that it didn't have a chance to do. So it's like, my idea of it is a little different than what people commonly believe. But if like I walked out of my body today and another spirit walked in, it's still my spirit, but it belongs to the same soul, but it's not my personality anymore. That's all shifted because it's now utilizing different conditioning, different, perspectives, etc. So that's what I believe about that. Yeah, quantum leaping is Andromeda. Quantum leaping is very similar. Quantum leaping is a very similar process as well. It's very much the same thing that I was talking about. So yeah. Yeah, the idea of walk-ins is like, there's an old idea and mindset around walk-ins. But I think part of it also has to do with the fact that when people were coming to understand the idea of a walk-in, the idea of comprehending that you can be more than one a spirit personality in the same lifetime, that people don't grasp that. And that's still kind of something that is not fully embraced in the idea of reincarnation, the idea of you can reincarnate and so forth. I always, when some of the old traditions, Vedic traditions, they talk about how like we can be insects and all these other things, and I thought that was insane. I was like, no, we're like all human beings. Like, why would we go through the process of being insects? I get it now. I understand what they were talking about, because there are some animals that we have very, very close bonds and relationships with, and those animals are our souls. And so that's an aspect. Call it a filament. It's like when you have a soul that sparks, the spark that flies off, then it turns into an animal consciousness. It's not the full consciousness of a person or of a human mind, but it still is an aspect of the soul. For myself, it's my mama cat. My mama cat is a part of my own soul. Even though I have 2 other cats, which I absolutely adore, I don't share the same connection that I do with my mama cat because she's part of my soul. There's a reason why. So we do the same thing as well. And also, it is possible that a parent and a child can also be part of the same soul, because there are people who come in with those opportunities as well. Nancy's like, why do people come in as transgender? My daughter Caitlin died by suicide and really suffered. I would love to hear from her. So I won't do a personal reading because I'm not doing readings. I'm just doing questions still. But as far as the idea of questions in with the transgender thing, by default, we aren't any gender. Gender is just a representation of energy. And so when you think of a feminine energy, it takes on a form, which is what we think of as a female human body. When we think of a male's energy, it's just a form of energy that is represented in physical form through, the physical components. So they're just representations of energy. By default, we actually don't really have a gender. And so when you have people who either are changing genders, it's because they are connecting more with a part of their inner being that is kind of more directly linked to the soul. And actually, their souls do have representative genders, but it's usually based on the experience that they've had. And sometimes it's genderless. There is no gender with the soul. Sometimes they will take on a gender, sometimes they won't. It just depends on the soul's awareness and understanding of self. But there is really no genderless is actually the grander soul's way of dealing with stuff. But we take on these genders for specific opportunities to evolve and to grow. When I was a child, I really believed I was a female in a male's body, and for many years I felt trapped in my body. I'm a female. I feel like female. I used to make myself look pretty. I used to use sheets to make myself dresses. I felt like a female in a man's body. And once I started to explore my spirituality, because I always just wanted to be a female, and once I explored my physicality, my sexuality, but also just explored myself spiritually, I realized that this body offers me opportunities that I don't want to waste. And so, for me, remaining and retaining my physical body as male helps to give me some advantages in experiencing life through very unique perspective. So instead of fighting it, I just embraced it, and then I decided to use it to my advantage. For example, if I were born with one missing leg and I did not have that leg, then I can either create a leg and have an artificial one, or I can just try to learn how to experience as that and then try to see if there's something I can gain from that. The problem is that a lot of people, especially a lot of the newer generations of personalities coming in, it's harder for them because they're coming into a world that is energetically chaotic. It's one thing that there's physical chaos happening around the world. You have people wanting to blow each other up. You have people who are hateful and nasty to each other, very disrespectful to each other. You have people who try to do everybody else up on. And so you have people who are very, very destructive. We're very self-destructive as a race of people and as beings. So you're coming into a world that's already got a whole lot going on. There's a lot more people today than there were, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. There's a lot more people on the planet. There's a lot more energy in the ether. There's a reason why I live out in the middle of nowhere and not in the city, because there's a lot of information and energy in a big city. And so for me, just being out in the countryside amongst nature is my way to connect with that level of energy, but also to not feel the oppression of energy that comes from being in a very highly in a place that is very highly populated. So it works for me. But you have a younger generations of people who are coming in, and they are a lot more synced up to who they are and who they're not. And that's a struggle for them because they don't know how to live in this world. They don't know how to be themselves in this world because this world has not made it easy for them and is quite hostile for them to be their authentic natural self. And so there's a struggle there for them. And so they're trying to understand themselves and they're reaching for anything that helps them to feel more like themselves. So by default, you're going to have people who are letting go of sexual associations. You're going to have people who give up sexual associations. You're going to have people who give up on the idea of needing to be one gender or another. And you're going to have people who just feel more connected to one gender or another because it makes them feel like home. It's like a pair of shoes that feels much more comfortable than what they're in. And so it's perfectly natural and normal for a person to feel that way. The older cultures, some of the native cultures or the native peoples, and they're different tribes because you can't just say native peoples and think you're talking about all native Pueblo people. They're different tribes, they're different people. You can't clump them all into one because they all have different belief systems. The Navajo, for example, don't really believe in the idea of mediumship because they don't want to disturb the ancestors. They don't want to disturb the spirits. They don't want to. And so they think of doing what I do. They feel as if I'm disturbing spirits. I don't go looking for them. They come to me. And I always ask that they come to me. I'm not going to go to them because that's the agreement that I have with Source. But that's one of the beliefs that the Navajo have. Don't disturb the spirits. While you have other tribes like the Hopi who believe in engaging with the ancestors. So it just depends on the tribe, but there are also tribes who are very accepting of the Burdigi or of the two-spirited people who come in feeling very much like they're both or feeling more lined up with one versus the other, but they call them two-spirited people. And that's now that's been a thing in many tribes, and now it's our kind are becoming aware of that. And it's just part of the experience of being human as well. Whatever you can do to make your experience here easier for yourself, do it, because life is not an easy thing to go through. And if you're not dealing with your own bullshit, you're dealing with somebody else's bullshit. You're dealing with like haters or people who just want to hate on for whatever reason because they feel entitled and they feel like that elevates them. And it's their way. It's the idea of like when you're on, you just got dumped into the ocean and you're swimming with a bunch of other people freaking out. Some people actually will just go and use someone to prop themselves up. That's what people who are haters are, or who have nothing better to do than to just go and to try to like come for you. They use other people to prop themselves up because they don't know how to support or sustain themselves without having to feed off of somebody else's energy or use someone else to feed themselves. And that's what you run into with those kinds of people. So some of the individuals out there who have very much want to be in control, want to dominate, want to hate, want to annihilate another person for their lifestyle, whatever that is. That's what you run into. You run into those kinds of people, and you have to, in some ways, you will have to engage with those types in some way or another at some point in your reality because they're a part of the human reality. But at the same time, you can disconnect and you can distance and you can definitely choose where you would rather put your energy towards and what you would rather support or sustain in this world. So let me see if there's any last question before I let you guys go. Yeah, correct. Yeah, 1810 says, well, so when you are able to connect to some other people, deceased loved ones, does that mean they don't take any other form? I'm pretty sure that you've probably had more than one cell phone. I've like updated many a times over the years. And so my original flip phone is not my current iPhone. That phone still exists, or that phone still, it was produced, it was created. That's how it was designed to exist. And so even after the body or the shell of the phone is gone, all of the data and information that it engaged with, etc., that also exists in somewhere in the ether, but it's like a personality. It's like its own like life there. So when I connect with someone's loved one in spirit, I'm connecting to the spirit personality of the person they knew in life. I'm not connecting to the person's soul, because they would not recognize the person's soul. They didn't have a life with the person's soul. They had a life with the person's with a spirit personality. So when I connect, I'm connecting to the spirit personality, and I'm trying to bring that through as clearly as I can. And so if someone's loved one is passed and they believe in reincarnation, that personality isn't going to come back and be the exact same personality. Now, there might be aspects of that personality that are going to be carried over from the soul level to a new incarnation, but it's not the same person popping back into the situation. So when I'm talking to the person, they're always going to remain in that state, because that exists in that state. That's where it resides, is within that energy spectrum. Yeah, past lives. Yeah, yeah, Cassidy, definitely. It's a whole other conversation about past lives, because you can totally get caught up in like the whole dynamics of it. That's going to be in my third book, because I'm running 3 books, right? The first one's the psychic, the second one's mediumship or spirit communication, the third one is spirituality. So the third one's going to include a lot of those tidbits and breaking it down and all that other stuff. I never saw Quantum Leap, Red Robin. I never saw it, so I'm not familiar with all of the stuff. I remember though the show. I never got around to seeing it. All right, guys, I think I'm done for the day. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. All right, guys, I love you all. I will be back on Friday for our usual study group time, so I will see you all then, okay? Take care, everybody. Bye.